Live from Las Vegas, this is NAB Show Live.
Hi, I'm Steve Wong, and I'm an Emmy-winning technologist with DXC Technology, the company formerly known as Hewlett-Packard Enterprise/CSC. Today, we're talking about cloud applications, and I'm really excited to have two of my favorite people and experts in cloud technology and applications. You guys want to introduce yourself, tell us about who you are and your companies? Ramy?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ramy Katrib. I'm founder of DigitalFilm, which is a post-production and software development company.
And Victor?
And I'm Victor Collins. Hello, everyone. I'm the Vice President of Global Sales for Luxoft.
All right. So, you know, I know broadcast, and I'm an old broadcast guy. Started out at ABC like 100 years ago. In that time, everything was very specific, hardware-focused equipment that only did one thing. And now we're in a changing environment where we have the power of compute in the cloud, we have applications and things like that. So, and I know some other industries are a little further ahead than broadcasters. So what is your word of advice, or what do you guys think about this new realm of technology with applications in the cloud?
Well, first of all, you're not that old.
I knew I liked this guy.
So for us, we've been actually promoting the notion of, you know, remote-based or cloud-based post-production for the better part of 5 years. And I know when we first started evangelizing it, it wasn't like it was well received, right? Because the industry had just gone through a transition from physical to file-based workflow. Remember, it wasn't that long ago where our industry was film. It was physical. You cut it, you had tape, it smelled, it gave you brain damage. And then over the course of 10 years, we transitioned to file-based, which is the idea of using a desktop computer, and I have files on it, which is not that long ago. So then cloud-based comes along.
What? A computer for video?
Yeah.
And film? What is that?
I mean, the notion that you can use a $3,000 computer in 1999 to do professional post-production was thoroughly uncommon back then. So it wasn't that long ago that we were a physical-based industry.
Yeah.
So I think what happened is some people were fatigued making that transition, and then comes cloud. What is cloud? It's like the most ambiguous term. For a long time, people didn't know what that meant. So what we tried to do is personalize it and provide cloud benefits that have meaning on set and in post, but without someone having to do anything different.
That makes sense. And I know, Victor, you come from an expertise where you see a lot of industries using the cloud, you know, years ago. What are some of your thoughts of those benefits?
Well, to dovetail on Ramy's comments, my first word would be embrace, because it's all about access and immediacy, where before the industry was all about one channel. That was an understood idea. You went to one channel or two or three, and that was your ultimate choice. Now it's almost every kind of medium or media platform that you can look to. The challenge in it is, and when I say embrace, is getting underneath that and really understanding the audiences and the loyalty around it by executing on those ideas, so that you don't create in your own self, whatever your enterprise is or initiative, your own silos within yourselves, that you lose the very audience that you built your success upon or that you hope to attract. So it's really in the execution and the talent, because so few today understand. They'll quickly embrace an idea like, oh, this will make a great idea for a distribution or a streaming idea, whether it's a subject matter or a technology approach, but they don't get underneath that and really understand the dynamics of what's required in that, and take a pause and look to, and selfishly I work for Luxoft, which has brilliant minds globally that solve very, very complex ideas because of the math and engineering skills that we maintain in our organization, because the idea of media is really, when you break it down, is just a big math problem or challenge.
And I'm talking about that. You know, Ramy, you're one of the folks that really cut the edge with technology, math problems, and entertainment. And we were talking before, and we were talking about your entertainment clients that you work with. What is it like to work with Roseanne, and what the heck does that have to do with technology?
A lot.
Wow.
Really?
A lot. Yeah, we just recently delivered season 10 of Roseanne.
Wow.
And I mean, to the producers and the creatives working on the show, they're not even aware of what we're doing on the back end in terms of storing all their data, right? Just the simple notion that everything they shot was readily available for them, because at one point they were iterating creatively across 9 episodes open-endedly, right? So it used to be that you did 1 episode, finished it, and then delivered it. That's how it used to be.
Well, especially with Roseanne. I mean, take a look at the first episode of Roseanne and how they did that, right? Compared to the workflow you're doing now.
Wow.
How does that differentiate with a typical broadcast of a TV show?
It's huge. I mean, that's a sitcom. Historically, sitcoms didn't go through a ton of color grading. Even some sitcoms don't do any color grading. They just mix them on stage, right? Wow. And that goes to broadcast. In fact, we digitized all 9 seasons of Roseanne.
Wow.
Just to kind of do our homework.
That's huge.
And what we, it was just finding the DVDs for all the seasons. But what we realized is that like season 4 was magenta, season 5 was greenish, season 6 was a mix of green and magenta. Nothing matched, right? That's how it used to be. So what we did is we provided a palette for the producers to come into the color bay, where all their media that they shot for the new Roseanne is readily there and accessible, as you said. But we also provided them all the old seasons so that they can look at it and see what it used to be, because they would sometimes have a romantic memory of what it looked like, but when they would see it, they couldn't believe it.
And this is with an application that you've done, or how do they?
I would say we've created an environment where all of the data related to any given project is readily accessible and easy to consume.
As opposed to taking a film can or a tape
or
off
an
a
LTO,
shelf.
right?
Wow.
So usually, I mean, most of post-production right now, when they shoot something, they put it on LTO and it sits on a shelf. And then once you do offline edit, then you recover the raw media from the LTO. We bypass that process. So we have cloud object storage, right? Which is a big data container so that we can conveniently and economically store everything. And that is uncommon. Right?
I was going to say, for the broadcaster today, that's very comfortable with a single-purpose machine, we're talking about a restructuring of an infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
That's very different than they're comfortable with.
Yes.
Right? So why would they do that? Why should they?
Well, once they realize the benefit, it's kind of like heroin, right? So imagine like having your entire photo, a good heroin. Imagine having your entire iPhone photo library, right? And I come to you and say, you know what, you're not going to have access to it. You're only going to have access to a third of it. That would be unacceptable, right? So once we gave people the opportunity to have access to everything, then they can never live any other way.
Very smart. And with that, I just thought of something with you, is that you paid attention to the quality, because now it's not just about the access, it's about the quality of the experience. And so you're paying attention to the colorization, so that rather than going to more than one site to get an episode here and there, they can binge watch and see the entire series, but the quality of the viewing is consistent of what they've been accustomed to, and if they were watching a traditional broadcast experience.
100%.
Yeah,
in fact,
it's really smart.
In fact, the way it played out is they shot all of the episodes, and then they were all sitting there like a 9-hour movie. And they iterated over and over. They tried to get that nuanced look, the new Roseanne look, for weeks. We spent, I'm not going to say how many hours we spent, but we spent a long time. And we created kind of a color fun zone, so there was no penalty for them iterating and trying out something new, down to the sofa, the couch, the picture, the kitchen.
Wow.
And when all was said and done, they had to finish. So we delivered not just one episode, we delivered the entire season in 2 weeks. Wow. And there's no way you can do that unless you have access to everything, that it's readally there. And again, that is a cloud infrastructure.
Exactly, that's the cloud.
Different. That's a very different business model and workflow. I mean, Victor, your clients are are struggling with this change. I mean, how do you address that? Because it's a scary thing, saying, I'm going to change my workflow into this cloud thing that I don't know what it is.
Right.
How do you address that?
Well, you first really discover the intention of what you're trying to do so that you really, like, where are you coming from, where you're going, and then what do you hope to achieve with the audience that you're hoping to have or maintain or grow. And there's a deliberate process in that, but underscored by the talent that you apply to it. And, you know, in your notion, like, I thought that was really smart because you were able to take a series, you know, leverage the cloud, because, you know, our customers can be any type of, you know, business person, technologist, but they're very much in their own domain typically. And so what Luxoft does and prides itself on is working in a very workshop, teaming environment. And then, you know, historically, we've had customers where we've done over the top with them that we started actually designing the actual boxes that were used initially to do on demand. And we've maintained our relationships throughout the year globally, throughout their experience globally, and now taking them into virtual boxes and dashboards because we inherently understand that. And you have to, it's easy to find a smart technologist. It's another thing to understand someone or a group that has the underlying skills and experience to understand the implications of that and have other peers to draw upon to collectively do it. Because, you know, entertainment viewing is an art.
And, you know, yeah. Victor, you mentioned globally, and I think that really addresses the workflow. You know, I remember 100 years ago we worked on a show that shot in Toronto. You remember this.
That's
and
right.
then you posted it in Los Angeles, and that was like hell,
yeah.
Getting that stuff overnight. So that sounds like an opportunity
yeah.
where a broadcaster can have a global workforce, and they don't have to all be in the same television station or studio. Can you address that on some of the shows you're working on?
What year was that, by the way?
I don't want to say that. but I do remember it was shot in Toronto.
that was before the term cloud was even being used.
I think that was our cloud that you and I invented. Basically.
Yeah.
It's a Ramy cloud.
So that was just for context, that was us commandeering a co-location in Toronto. Two co-locations.
Yeah, in Toronto and downtown.
LA. Wow.
This was well before. This was really the beginning that we did this prototype. So there we went from colo to colo with a very big bandwidth, 10 gig bandwidth.
Dedicated pipe.
Now what we do is, you know, it's under the auspices of remote post. We try not to actually use the word cloud because it's confusing to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So we say remote post. So now what we do is we bring the post-production process itself to where you are physically.
Interesting.
Through orchestrated process of IT administration, post-service, a lot of security, and our own software development effort to kind of wrap it all together. So we call it post-host. So let's say, I'll give an example. We're working on a show called The 100 on the CW. There's a 4K HDR monitor in the producer's home because he works on multiple shows. So when we do color correction from DigitalFilm tree, we actually bring the color process to him at home. We can even hear his wife in the background as they're doing like a color correction.
No, I like the blue.
Exactly. So, but the thing is we're not bringing a representation of the camera raw. Mm-hmm. We actually push the camera raw, amazingly, to his house where our system is.
You got to be kidding.
No.
So I'm thinking of headaches. I'm thinking security. I'm thinking latency. I'm thinking, how do you move that size file to a house? So you got to tell us about that.
Well, that particular process is a tad cumbersome, but let me try to explain it. So most people...
Don't say anything secret. But,
No, of course not. Most people will take a raw file and compress it into a very good-looking H.264 file, and they'll stream that because that's convenient and doable, right? What we do is we trickle let's say your final show is 30 minutes. That's 30 minutes of raw media. It's not all the media, just that package.
Wow.
We start trickling it a day or two before, even if you've got really chumpy internet at home, right? We actually will study your internet, see what you've got and what the issues are or how fast is it, and we'll actually schedule the file to get to your system. So when you go to the screen, you haven't done anything. You are observing a color correction session happening from Digital Film Tree where metadata, the color metadata, like I turned this scene a little blue, that's very tiny. That's metadata. So it zips through the internet with little to no latency and gets applied to the camera raw where you are or where the producer of the 100 is. Now, that is doable. The security and the IT administration really is the hardest part of it. So
how do you address that?
We built a router with our own software called PostHost, which basically goes on all our remote systems and essentially allows DFT to extend our network. So that session in Manhattan Beach for the 100 looks and feels like the session in the bay down the hall at Digital Film Tree.
Wow.
It's part of our own network, and it's essentially, in layman's terms, it's a VPN tunnel, right? But we developed a lot of additional things on top of that, like two-factor authentication. You can't log in, we log you in. We audit every transaction. If that puck or the post host gets disconnected, we get notified. I get a text, right? And even within that VPN tunnel, we run very typical Aspera encryption.
Right.
So it's security on security, and all the while there are real-life post people administering this. So IT is the logistical challenge, but it's still a post activity, right? You can't get away from the nuance.
You're doing an
of
emulation,
post.
right? You're not the actual content isn't actually. It's although it appears there, in reality, it's still maintained and it's at its source, but it's viewed at a distance.
Well,
so it's not actually. So it's even more. And the security of itself, and the intellectual property side of it, is guaranteed in the model that you just described. Right?
Yes, the breakthrough was being able to apply the color decision list information or the color grade on the footage where you are, because for DPs, knowing that they're looking at the actual raw media that came out of their camera sensor is, again,
it's a game changer.
It's like, wow, once they realize that, then they get really, really excited. And then when they do something else where they're only looking at a representation of the camera, well, clearly that's not as good.
It's really smart.
So, Victor, I mean, for the other applications, again, this is very specific to the workflow. You allow the artists to be artists. They're not thinking about the IT background, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, for these applications to run in the cloud, Victor, you still have security questions. Mm-hmm. You still have latency things. So for your other clients, how do you address those things?
Well, I mean, you have to have an entire ecosystem. Just like with Filmtree, I'm sure you're an organization that would love to have even broader reach. And so inherently you've designed something that is very well received, effective. It really it enhances collaboration, but yet it's still secure. What Luxoft does is it wraps around those customers, like yourself, and expands that reach. So our ability to do it, and we have global locations throughout the world. We have 13,000 plus very sophisticated, highly skilled developers and consultants that can do hardware engineering as well as software engineering and development. And so what we do is, sometimes it's ideally, like we've won awards in other industries, like in auto with Daimler and Toyota with navigation. We look to our experiences globally, and we take those experiences and we bring them forward to customers. Like, say, the film. Sure. If we were related to each other, then that would be a benefit. But in that model, I think having that core of talent management structure to go with it are key. For these types of addresses, because when that producer who has that wonderful experience, as obviously is happening and Filmtree's doing brilliantly with, wants to do a syndication or a partnership or goes to Cannes and finds another producer that they want to do something else with it relative that they can do, they need to be able to turn that on immediately, and that's something that we have.
So I got a question. I mean, you're changing the game for broadcasters. you're having them not only think differently, but to do their business differently. So do they need to throw out their compute systems the way they are, or can they use some legacy equipment with it and tie in? I mean, what do you guys see about that?
Yeah, it's not about ripping out everything. It's about adding new benefits, right? So we approach it from the standpoint of pain points. Like, what is the thing that sucks the most? Like, what's the burning house situation?
Because that's ultimately the ultimate bottleneck of the creative purpose.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, essentially, our lab, we fashioned it after, a class at Stanford called ME310, which is premised on different people from different disciplines solving exquisitely complicated problems, right? So there's a problem right there, and I bring a sociologist, a computer scientist, an engineer. I put them together for a year and have them iterate on a solution or a prototype. That's exactly how we do it at DFT.
Now I see the brilliance of Steve of why you put us together.
Yeah, because you've been talking about very similar hardware, software. That's an interdisciplinary enterprise, and usually those people don't necessarily hang out together, let alone a sociologist and a film major.
True.
So we basically just put this environment together, and then you start listening more carefully. Instead of thinking you have the solution for any given thing, we simply listen, and people usually in a place of trust will let you know what they're having problems with.
2 ears and 1 mouth, right?
Exactly.
You're supposed to listen.
Or you ask them, like, what kind of problems are you having, or what's your biggest challenge, and that usually gets it going. So that's how we started making these software solutions based on pain points, right?
Nice.
And that's kept us vibrant, and then you put different people on that problem, and
the cool thing,
it works.
You're not just making stuff to make stuff, you're making something specific to go through a solution for something.
Very similar to what you guys are doing.
Craftsmanship.
Yeah.
And listening to your audience and getting that meeting of the minds so that the technology empowers and eliminates those bottlenecks so that creativeness can come forward and art can be produced.
That's right. The magic.
The magic. Exactly. That's why we do what we do.
Yep.
So, we're going to have to go to break in a moment here, but, I know what binge viewing is. And Ramy said, do you know what binge delivery is?
Oh.
That's what I said. So what the hell is binge delivery? So can you tell us a little bit about this? Then we're going to go into a break.
Sure.
Just give us the highlights and then go into the details when we come back from the break.
It all started when we were working on a show called Angie Tribeca for Turner. And the executive producer needed to sign off, but he was on a movie. So the 10 episodes sat there for like 7 months until the
That's
executive...
That's going to be expensive.
Well, we try to not penalize anybody, but it sat there, so when he came back and started signing off, we realized that we were delivering an entire season also in a very short amount of time. So I realized that, and then that was the first time Turner was experimenting with binge watching, where they released all 10 episodes like Netflix.
Which actually, getting back to Roseanne, binge watching makes sense. You've got to colorize everything for those episodes to make sense for binge watching.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and this hits the consumer because on Netflix you're used to binge watching, right? And other companies are starting to do that more and more. Mm-hmm. So when you have an entire season, essentially you're creatively iterating on a 10, 13, 24-hour movie, depending on how many episodes you have. So that is... binge delivery is us scrambling to pull that off because it's a 10-hour movie with hundreds of changes that are going on in real time, and you have to track everything.
Wow.
And then deliver it all at once, hence binge delivery. Thank you, binge watching, right? Binge watching equals binge delivery.
You're right.
So how does that change your workflow? I mean, tell us how, cloud enables that sort of delivery for you. I mean, could you have done it before? Not
as well, and probably not at all. But if you're iterating across all those episodes, that means you need to have all the camera raw material readily accessible. Otherwise, you're spending time retrieving it from LTO. LTO, for those that don't know, is the de facto archive for the entire media industry worldwide. So when you shoot something, you back it up on LTO.
Which they may or may not be making those machines anymore.
Oh, that's scary. Well, that will then precipitate essentially a transition to the cloud. where the cloud is where you store everything in perpetuity, whether it's on your own premises or in public cloud like on Google or some kind of hybrid in between. But to answer your question, it was essentially kind of designing our own object storage.
Interesting.
Leveraging the OpenStack community. This was well over 4 years ago.
Wow.
And creating our own flavor of Swift object storage, specifically for the media and entertainment industry. Because at the time, there weren't really any, 4 years ago, there wasn't any Swift object storage for Hollywood. In fact,
True.
Those two communities didn't even hang out. So now, object storage is rather ubiquitous. You can go on the floor today, 4 or 5 years later, and there's got to be at least 20 different object storage solutions, right? Back then, there were none, right? So we went ahead and took it upon ourselves to design our own with our own software development team. And that...
Very smart guys, by the way.
Very smart guys.
From an industry perspective, rather than a technology company coming in to trying to transference into the industry, you did it from inside out.
Yes, based on the pain point of having the need to access everything, and block storage, which is what our industry was used to, is way too expensive to store everything.
Right.
Right? Because that's what, you know...
And have governance as well around it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Audit, governance, security policy.
Which is critical.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but do you see that moving to like an as-a-service type of model? I mean, how does that affect the industry?
Well, look, Google is here, AWS is here.
They changed the model, right? I mean, you're used to spending a ton of cash up front in a CapEx, and all of a sudden they changed that accounting function now.
They have, and actually production budgets still don't have categories for what we're speaking about. Right? So there's no cloud storage line item.
I remember us going through a budget one time and saying, what are we going to replace this on?
Yeah, so usually like when
duplication fee or something.
When we store a studio, when we bill a studio for storing things because they really need it accessible, we find some obscure category like duplication or some legacy category, and that's how they bill it, because it's still that novel. You know, from the production side.
And now it's cloud meeting microservices, and what that will determine is a whole new idea that traditional like cloud providers are having to face and are challenged by. So it could easily be another innovator that could pop up that could end up being that player. You know, we're used to seeing now companies emerge out of nowhere. To me, that play between microservices and cloud access, whatever, like you said, whatever that means in terms of off-prem access and secure access and storage, it's to be determined.
Yeah.
So
I think the cool thing,
film trick.
You know, the open source software out there allows folks to develop it.
Yes.
You know, unlike they did in the past where it would be so expensive.
Yes.
So that's one of the benefits.
Well, consider IBM, HP, Google are active participants in the open source community. Although they have their own products that they charge for, they also contribute to open source code. Sometimes we'll put forward something that becomes its own open source movement, right? Like TensorFlow from Google, right, which is their machine learning technology, is free.
Wow.
It's free, right? It works better if you put it on Google Cloud Platform.
Sure.
But so even the big juggernaut companies are involved in this community. What's interesting to me is that you can have two people from two different companies working on a mutual challenge, but they're vehement competitors when they go home.
Yeah.
Right? See, that's cool. That's what I call the multidisciplinary environment. It's completely different than Hollywood. Hollywood is so wired differently than that, right?
So how do they work together? How can Hollywood, which has to work together with technology companies, work with a different model? I
think once enough people realize the benefits, then it becomes more commonplace. But I coined the term co-opetition, right?
Right.
So I remember we were working on a show where we and another post house were doing visual effects on the same show.
Wow. How does that work?
That happens all the time. When you have a show that's very visual effects intensive, then you might have 5 different visual effects companies doing different aspects of the visual effects work, like 3D or compositing. So we offered them access, secure access to all the camera raw, which we had, and they were like, "What?" You know,
they're used to you sending them a tape or something.
Yeah, a
right?
tape or something. It caught them off guard, but then it actually ended up working, and then we made friends with them, right? Because now, instead of going to LTO or going through just a tedium of physically having drives go back and forth across town, and then to retrieve the file you need, you know, this was just go to the folder, it's all there.
So walk me through that. So how would this cloud type of application enable that to work as a business model compared to shipping the LTO tapes back and forth?
So you do need a place to store all this stuff, right? And in our case, we actually design our own software and we build our own hardware. So we have
your own cloud.
Petabytes, yes.
Private cloud.
Over 2 petabytes, right, of object storage. We call it ProStack. That's our name for it.
Just don't call it pedophile, whatever you do.
No, I won't. So ProStack, kind of to mimic the OpenStack. We don't really market a lot. We're a small company, so a lot of people haven't heard about it. But that's our own.
You got a ton of shows, I got to say. You do a ton of TV shows.
Well, it's the golden age of TV, so we've been blessed. There's never been this much television in the history of humanity.
And now the demand to watch it at will.
Exactly.
Right.
So we store all that, and then we give them access. To them, it might look like an Aspera handoff, right?
Right.
Right. So they, and more often than not, we create a folder that has all the raw files that they need. We get sign off from the producer saying, yes, that's good, they're vetted. This is all in writing, right? It's a zero trust type of situation. It's not like
zero trust. Boy, that reminds me of another topic.
Yes, it's not like, hey, let me help you out. Right. It's more like everything has to be audited. We need to get the IP addresses of the specific system that will be accessing it. If anything changes, all bets are off. So it's mostly IT and security administration. The process of going to a folder and grabbing your file looks just like going to your desktop, but you're going to our object storage.
Yeah, and then there's another side to that as well, is the sharing of that there's a fear factor in it, because you're basically allowing your content to go into some sharing idea that there could be, like you said, zero trust.
Well,
but now that introduces ideas like blockchain and things like that are coming to form.
I mean, the producers must go nuts that you're sharing their show that hasn't been shown, over this cloud application.
It's their vendors. These are to their vendors that are working to create their show, right? We're not sharing it with anyone outside of a very small ecosystem.
And it's an enlightenment, too, because I think a lot of customers have this old school notion of security means you having it on yourself, when in reality, that could actually be your greatest risk. And
I
the
think
cloud
we found this out
actually
in the
affords
past,
you a
Victor,
lot
right?
of security more than it's counterintuitive, I think. And having an organization like Ramy, who really does this for a lot of customers, their reputation's at stake. They obviously built in the right vanguards and safety measures. The content is protected better so than anyone being, say, that producer in Manhattan Beach, loading up whatever he shot for the day on whatever servers he might have in his garage.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you hit a good point. You're talking about security. You've got these huge companies like Amazon and Azure that have huge SLAs and that
are great providers, but the governance around that is challenging sometimes.
Right. Yeah. But again, them paying for the security or ensuring the security is probably better than a small production company that doesn't have that kind of
But that's why you need like Film Tree or in case like Luxoft is to help who understands inherently those security structures and protections, because just having your content with one of those providers doesn't guarantee the end all, because it all goes down to the data governance policies and how those are negotiated, how those are managed, how those are audited. Just because you have your content, regardless of who that is, doesn't mean that in itself that content is secure. It needs a brokering, it needs a management of it, and especially in this world of media, which we clearly see every day is challenged with new ideas with the best of the companies. You really need the expertise that comes from that point of view to really act. It's like you go to a doctor to get well, you go to film tree, or you go to a company like Luxoft who has that right expertise to give you that guardianship to protect your interests, because you can't know everything based on what there is to know. So
am I hearing this right? So for broadcasters, the concern in the past of cloud application security, the concern about latency and all that, that's a thing of a past?
No, it's more of a self-resolving situation.
It's execution. It really is in the execution. Those are all there. It just has to be applied in the right manner with the right insights and the right skills and experience. Mm-hmm. It's really what I think Ramy's really hitting on is the craftsmanship of it. It's not, it's all there to build. It will give you the best of the best. It's understanding how to build it. Not everyone can build it.
Yeah. I mean, for us, when we were evangelizing the idea of remote post, cloud post years ago, what came up more than anything was, well, the internet is not available in this location, or it's too slow, what they call the last mile. What's interesting is that I think we went from like 1,000 ISPs, and they all kind of went out of business and reconsolidated, and we're now down to a much smaller footprint of ISPs that essentially take care of the entire world, right? Mm-hmm. So now when we are trying to connect a production in Fiji, like Rect,
50% tax credit, by the way.
Yes, 50% tax credit for, so that 100 megs for $30,000 a month, but it's still cheaper than flying humans back and forth with hard drives. So, right. But I still hear people respond saying, oh, there's an internet issue. Well, 4 years have gone by. The internet issue has been self-resolving.
It's Moore's Law, isn't it?
Yeah, it's cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can be on a stage, and the stage will charge you some exorbitant amount of money for internet, but that is not what the marketplace is doing. That's just people trying to get away with it as long as they can.
Right.
But their days are numbered, right? So all the people that are artificially inflating the internet, they're just not going to be around that long, because the internet actually is coming down in cost. So I pay less and I get more bandwidth. There's people at home that have 100 megs, 300 megs, 500 megs. That is plenty to do legitimate remote post-production. So that's a huge development, but I think a lot of people are still holding on to that idea from 3-4 years ago. But I think they need to refresh and
yeah, there's a paradigm around that. And we live in a global world and a global economy with lots of different regions and lots of different options that many are unaware of and are naive, and unless they have, the world is an incredible resource, and it's now possible with the cloud to tap every idea and resource imaginable if you have the right insight and talent to understand how to apply it.
So walk me through this. Say I'm a broadcaster coming to this show, looking to buy a bunch of equipment. So should I think differently on this, knowing that maybe I can get the best editor in Fiji and get a 50% tax credit for my news show?
Yeah.
Maybe I get the best anchor that may be in Maui because he likes living in Maui.
Sure.
And with cloud applications and internet quality going up and prices going down?
Yes.
Should I think differently building a television station nowadays?
I think for the most part, production remains the same, right? You still try to find the best talent, best creative talent, best writers, best actors, best hosts, right? That stays the same, but I think what you should do nowadays is ask yourself, how can I connect my production to the internet? Period. That's it.
It's
such a silly, simple thing to say, but that's it.
I agree. And then with that, the intent of it. Like, what is your true intent? Like, what are you ultimately wanting to achieve with that connection? Like, what is the intent? And how fast and what are those requirements that you need to meet in order to benefit from that experience? And
so again, you think of as a broadcaster. My goal as a broadcaster, say I own a television station, is to get viewers. That's my business model.
Right.
My guys sell ads.
But we live in a world of demographics now, and we've learned with the internet, it's really about affinity with shared value experience. How do you construct that so that when you get there, you're actually going to benefit from it?
You take a look at most of the IT spend for broadcasters, 80% is maintenance. So with this cloud model, does that go away? Do you outsource that now to the best worker in the best place? Or?
Some people are. It's probably more of a transitional moment where you start relying less on on-prem heavy equipment. I was just on a truck, a 4K truck, that was broadcasting the Cavaliers-Laker game.
Oh, wow.
At Staples Center, and that was a formidable machine truck with just filled with machinery. But they were doing 4K broadcast right there and then. So I don't know how you replace something like that. That is so highly specialized.
Maybe it's a hybrid solution, right?
Well, there's other areas where you can start to, utilize object storage, like I said. Send all the files to a centralized location, and not just the camera raw files. The camera reports, the sound reports, the scripts, every conceivable piece of metadata that's associated with the production, even before you know what the upside is, just do it. Because when you centralize everything, then you have the opportunity, at least, to mine it, to look at it, to visualize it, to derive benefit from it. And that's a work in progress. I think that's something that people are still trying to appreciate, the ROI of why am I gathering all this metadata.
That's an interesting thing. You're right. Metadata, data is data, right? But good data is the only thing that matters. So from a production standpoint, if we can take applications that do analysis of all this data in the cloud, which there's a ton of them, Hadoop and a bunch of folks. So from production, how would you use that? Why do you care about all that data from the past shows?
Well, we consulted a software company that was mining information about products that were within shows, like this from IKEA, or the shirt, or the sunglasses.
That's a commercial for IKEA.
Right, it's not. But that's a specific example. And now I've seen 3 different companies doing similar things, where I'm watching a TV show, and I like those glasses, and I want to buy them. Well, that all emanates from metadata that comes from set dressing or wardrobe or all of the departments that are involved. Because if I'm designing a set, and I know that chair is from IKEA or from plumbers, that information goes from my set design notebook all the way down to delivery, where the studios now can mine that for marketing endeavors with Target or IKEA, right? So outside of metadata, you can't really do those types of cool things, right?
But are producers seeing a value in this metadata? Because the telcos are.
The studios might. Sometimes there's value to the producers, sometimes there's value to the studios.
And I
They're
think
not necessarily always congruent.
Right.
There's all kinds of benefits to many different people.
They buy into the value proposition, but again, it's about execution, because metadata quickly becomes data, it's the old data dictionary. Like, how do you quantify that in a value-driven way so that it's a consistent, and in this notion of we're sharing, the zero trust idea where sharing wasn't key, metadata exists. It could be the same descriptors or keywords, but they alter in a tiny bit. And so it renders a lot of search strategy, invaluable. So I think having a source of a process and having metadata able to be more automated and then normalized across various media silos or media hierarchies and trees and however the content is distributed is key going forward. And it's something that Luxoft actually is doing.
So how do you do that? How do you get all these cloud applications to work together? You can have this great analytics software that's pulling out all this information out of the metadata. How do you make everything work together?
Through the well-published API of all the players, right? So if you are a software solution on one end of the cycle and another software on the other end, basically you publish your API so that we can speak to each other, we can share information. I'll give you an example of a project we're working on where you can dump PDFs, right, of camera reports, sound reports, script notes, the script, all documents related to production, and we'll do a optical character recognition, and stuff that's even handwritten now becomes searchable, kind of like a Google search.
Oh, wow.
So let's say I'm trying to get information about a show, and I think I remember the episode name, so I just start doing it. It's called a fuzzy search. And I'll start pulling up for you related information, just like Google, when you start putting golf club, driver, and then it starts to filter as you get more specific in your search. Same exact thing, but for production, right? So that is something where we explain to producers and production people that you don't have to do anything different. We're just going to essentially centralize all of the metadata or the paper or the documents that you're generating, and then allow you to mine them and search them either now or 50 years from now when you're trying to unearth or recover that show.
So I got a question about that. So for this, obviously, you need some sort of cloud application, and if you got to keep it for 50 years, how do people want to pay for this now? Do you see it as a software as a service? You know this, Victor.
Sure.
Or do you see them saying, I want to buy that cloud application, one-time fee, and keep it for 50 years? What do you guys see? What's the preferred consumption method of a cloud type of application for broadcasters?
I think ultimately everyone wants a subscription model because it's the valuations and the capitalization and the costs and all that make it easier for the P&Ls and financial management of those ideas. I think there's been some false starts in those SaaS models that have left a lot of players, either the companies get acquired or they get merged, and then what happens to the assets, what happens to the files that they had secured, or companies go out of business, and so in theory, in practice, SaaS is always desired. However, for media content, it's still a lot of cases very immature, not at the point where it needs to be, and so I think again there's a due diligence that comes involved to really understanding, is whoever's going to be my provider, regardless of the size and magnitude of the organization, because oftentimes you can be an enormous company that does SaaS, but then decides to cut that idea off later when they change focus in a different industry vertical, and so suddenly you're left without promise. And so I think it's very valuable to have, like Ramy's company or like in my case Luxoft, have stewardship with that idea, so that you just don't jump to what appears shiny and promising, but really has financially the ability and the stability to guarantee the long term. So
how do you look at that, Ramy? I know you got a ton of folks pitching you at your post facility all the time, the latest and greatest software, and I know you guys develop a ton of stuff, but when you're looking at these cloud applications, do you say, give me a SaaS model, or I just want to pay the license fee once? How do you look at that?
It depends on the use case and what pain point we're trying to resolve. You call it stewardship, we call it managed remote post, right? So even if you're using a cloud that is a server in your location, or I'm using AWS, or I have some kind of intermediate company that's synchronizing those two things, you still need humans who can manage that, and we call stewardship, because oftentimes, even with the Googles and the AWSs, now they have, compared to a few years ago, they have really brilliant media people now, right? So they can speak the language.
Yes.
But there's still a nuance, that goes with production and the rigors of production that I think doesn't go away. Right, so
exactly.
you need to essentially be an advocate for, in our case, an advocate for our clients.
Absolutely.
Because there is no panacea on anybody, with anybody. There just isn't. You need to have someone manage it, and oftentimes productions don't have extra staff to manage a cloud orchestration. Are you kidding me? That's like so far away from reality, and that's why we're trying to do it one step at a time and say, hey, let's at least connect you to the internet and start to reap these benefits, right?
The internet's a good thing, I hear, right?
Yeah. So what you're talking about are the more sophisticated, software as service, and there are so many solutions out there right now that it is the best time in history in terms of options, and it's confusing, but it's a competitive landscape, and better products will gobble weaker products, and that's how it should be.
Right.
So for us, we don't get into the weeds of, how it all works with our clients, because they're not ready for it. Now, if someone is, we're sitting down and we have an interdisciplinary room where we have our IT administrator and our colorist in the same room, talking about how we present you the color experience, and use language that's comprehensible, right? Because everyone assumes that when you say something that everybody understands it. I mean, the truth is, it's mostly education now. We spend by far the majority of our time educating, speaking normally, right? We spend much more time doing that than we design and creatively iterate. Because if it's not being applied with clients, what's the point?
Right.
So.
Because if you don't have the stewardship, but underlying in the stewardship is also governance. And governance means both the vendors you're working with as well as the customer organizations and cultures themselves. Because left to their own devices, you know, if you have a project manager or someone who's responsible for content for a certain domain area, and they independently work, and you trust them to work with a provider like AWS or Google, whatever, and something happens to them, and what happens to your data? Or if they are setting the policies and they need access to content and they have to do something quickly for a show, they could easily write over a master recording, and it would be unknown to you until much later that the level of damage that just occurred that they naively didn't understand in that different server domain. They were actually doing that because another project manager, another owner of that content was unrelated to their work, was using that space that wasn't obvious to them. And so those nightmare stories, you know, are best achieved with, you know, there's a whole idea around governance and stewardship that is so critical in moving to these types of cloud models. And without experience and knowledge of what that requires, you're really taking a great risk.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's well said.
So, Ramy, I know you've been on the cutting edge of some of Hollywood's television production, and all the way back to Scrubs and showing those guys how to edit on Apple before anyone was doing that. So when you're talking to Hollywood's top producers and you're talking about how you can do television differently, where do you see the future of post-production and broadcast with the ever-changing environment? Where do you guys see that going, say, 5 years from now?
I see post-production coming to where you are. Right, I still see brick and mortar.
Right here, or just to the individual.
Like we can set it up right here. I mean,
use our phones.
This monitor is not good enough, but we can set it up wherever you want it. Like I said, it's come to the home. Mm-hmm. I mean, we used to do these remote setups for projects far away, like Prague or Vancouver. We work on a show called American Housewife, which is 1.5 miles away from Digital Film Tree at Radford.
Oh, I didn't know.
And we set up a 4K monitor for the DP, but they didn't have enough room, so they stuck it in the line producer's office. And so now the DP does color sessions in the line producer's office, and now the line producer is in on it. So he sits in too. So it's this iterative, collaborative, iterative, color process, but we also do it for titling and online and the entire post process. I think that's where things are going, because now the density of people's schedules and the budgets shrinking is such that, driving from the west side to the valley is a formidable ordeal, right? And people don't want to do it. So we're putting out these systems where you are, but still with the same scheduling, the same oversight, the same stewardship, as you said, of post-production, but completely leveraging, cloud infrastructure, all these different technologies, and more than anything, our own software development team, who over time now understand the post-production process better. So when we hired our developers early on, they actually had no idea what post-production is. They just think it's kind of cool, and they're coloring stuff.
I'd like to be able to do that, right?
Hey, let's blow that stuff up. So they thought it was neat, but now, several years in, I think we're really getting better at it because they're developing software, but now they have a greater understanding of the context of what they're doing, right? And that is super cool. At first, we would sit there and, just like with a client, educating a client, explain to them why we want to do this, And some of them are curious, like, why do you want to do that? Like we'll say something and say, well, that's dumb. Why do you want to do that? And so, but now they're kind of in on it, and they're sitting in the same room with our artist, right? There's no hierarchy, like the artist is more important, or they share and they commiserate and they iterate together.
And just as we're getting
Victor, in closing, we got a minute left.
Okay.
Where do you see the future of broadcast and
Well, I just think we're just now, as we're getting
applications?
these ideas down, we're about to be hit with another wave, which is the VR experience. And, you know, I think not really appreciating and respecting these notions of what we just discussed in our conversation, it's imperative, because we're going to be moving into this other notion very fast and very quickly, in the sense of being part of the content and being part of the story. And how are you going to do that at the same time take traditional media that you've relied upon and trying to modernize that in terms of at-will access? It's an incredible time that we're living in. It's incredible, and I think that's why I'm so passionate and excited about all this. I think it's
That's
great.
why you guys are sitting here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I have to call out the development of blockchain for production and post-production. Blockchain, as you know, is
Just had a talk on blockchain yesterday, actually.
yeah. I mean, it's already.
So it's not a fad?
Well, it's not a fad at all, but I think it's infant in the production and post-production space.
Yeah.
But to me, it made all the sense in the world. A decentralized ledger, because I'm already exchanging files from you. Boy, wouldn't it be great if I could, in an immutable way, keep track of everything, forever and ever, and for that record to be true, right? So that every time we transact together, we build trust together. I mean, what better thing for the post-production industry? And we already have a project incorporating blockchain into the day in, day out,
Nice.
back and forth that happens with our clients.
Very cool. So again, I want to thank you guys for coming out, to my
Cool, get to use that.
favorite guys
Yeah.
in Hollywood, and the coolest guys in Hollywood I get to hang out with. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Appreciate
All right.
it. Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone.